Welcome, everyone. We'll get started momentarily here. My name is Thomas Peterson, and I'm a field organizer working with Audubon, Arkansas this spring. Thanks very much for joining our campaign kickoff meeting here. If you want to, as we wait for a couple more people to join us, introduce yourself in the chat. You're more than welcome to do so. Perhaps say your name, where you're calling in from, things like that. And so in case you haven't signed our petition to protect solar energy in Arkansas this legislative session, please go ahead and do so now. You'll be able to find that link in the chat momentarily if you don't see it there yet. And we'll get started in earnest shortly as we have some more folks trickling in. And as people begin joining, I want to share a few best practices for Zoom. I know probably folks are spending a lot of time on Zoom these days, but just in case, make sure your microphone is muted when you aren't talking. You can mute and unmute using the microphone button on the lower left corner of the screen. And if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, feel free to do so in the chat where everyone's introducing themselves as well. And we'll do our best to get to it promptly. And thank you for those who have begun introducing themselves already. And I think we've got just about a critical mass here. So why don't we get started with the presentation, and I'll sort of run through the agenda and who all will be joining us here today. Great to see everyone popping up in the chat here and introducing. And we'll get into breakout rooms later on where folks will get to chat some more. But just to get started, so welcome everyone to this campaign kickoff meeting. We are joined here this evening by a bunch of wonderful folks from Audubon. Gary Moody, the Director of State and Local Climate Strategy for the National Audubon Society, will be speaking to us in just a few minutes. And we're also joined by Brent Newman, the Senior Policy Director for Audubon Delta, and Aaron Mead, Senior Campaigns Manager for the National Audubon Society. And you'll all meet them in your breakout rooms in just a few minutes. And just to go over our agenda for this hour, so we'll begin by talking about the 2019 Solar Access Act, the progress that's been made as a result of that over the last couple of years, and also potential rollbacks that we might face this legislative session, and Gary Moody will be presenting on that. I'll talk briefly about our spring 2021 grassroots strategy, how we protect this progress, and then in breakout rooms we'll talk about how to get involved and how to be effective citizen advocates on this issue this spring. And before we launch in, one thing quickly that I want to note, some news that came in just this afternoon that I think will be great news to hear for Audubon members is that the Biden administration said today they would postpone implementing a measure that would have removed criminal penalties for killing migratory birds. So the Migratory Bird Treaty Act will be maintained, which is great news. Good thing to hear this Thursday, and exciting as we launch into this meeting. But I will pass to Gary Moody now to talk about the passage of the 2019 Solar Access Act.
Hey, Thomas, thank you so much, and thank you to all of our participants tonight for taking time out to join us. I really do appreciate it. It's good to see such a nice mix of very familiar faces, as well as some folks I haven't had the opportunity to meet before. So I'm very excited to get to visit with you about this issue tonight. I wanted to start by kind of sharing this story of what this group did together in 2019, our last full legislative session in Arkansas. We were able to I've got the welcome shortly slide back up on my screen. But we were able to come together and pass a piece of legislation that has turned out to be tremendously important for clean energy in Arkansas, the Solar Access Act. And our quest to do that originated from our bird science. Our science tells us that climate change is the number one threat to North American birds. We wanted to live those values and looked at a number of things we could do, but had run into some roadblocks ourselves as we investigated doing solar power at our Granite Mountain in Little Rock Audubon Center. And that as a nonprofit, the way state laws were set up, there were some barriers that would have made it difficult for us to install our own solar power and fully benefit from it. So that's sort of the genesis of the law. We said, if we're facing these regulatory barriers, certainly there are other entities. And as we dug in, we found that despite being 11th in solar capacity in Arkansas, in terms of amount of sunshine, that we were way back in the list at 43rd in terms of solar power that had actually been installed. So we tried to address some of the barriers that we thought had made that gap possible. One of the things I think we did right from the very beginning is built a solid strategy. We knew that by ourselves in our current state, we didn't have the political clout to go out and get a win in the state legislature. In fact, similar measures had failed without advancing past committee in previous sessions. So the first thing we did was set out to build a stronger, bigger coalition, both on the grassroots side, but also in terms of finding other impacted businesses and nonprofits that face the same roadblocks we did. Lauren, if you could go ahead and advance the slide, we'll get rolling. So here you can see, our number one goal was to pass the Solar Access Act. That bill did a handful of things, but it authorized third-party solar purchasing arrangements, which had previously been banned in Arkansas. It increased the size limit of privately owned solar that could be installed under our law called net metering. And it grandfathered in folks who chose to make an investment. It gave 20 years of assurance through grandfathering that the rules couldn't be changed after you make that investment to make it less economical for you. So provided some market certainty to folks that they could know they were making a good deal. Our strategy, knowing the makeup of the General Assembly in Arkansas, was to focus on conservative messaging and to bring in some non-traditional allies. We knew that it couldn't just be the environmental and conservation organizations advocating for this law change. And we knew we were going to have some powerful allies in the state's monopoly utilities who were antagonistic towards these policies. We also focused on key members that we had identified as being crucial to our success, key committee members, leaders. Even one of our early targets was the Public Service Commission chairman in Arkansas. It's an appointed position from the governor. But we knew that there were certain folks that were going to be key to our ability to move this. What you're seeing here on this slide with all the logos are the folks that we were able to bring into our coalition. So you see a number of large companies, other folks like the Arkansas County Judges Association, the general contractors, even an electric cooperative. So one utility that was more forward-looking than the others was brave enough to join our coalition. And the Christian Coalition of America. We were able to come together in support of solar power. And what that did for us is it gave us a lot of credibility when we went to talk to members, and we could show them, our legislation, and then, all of these organizations that were behind it. Our major tactics were to get that corporate support so that we could really hit home on the jobs and economic development in addition to the environmental benefits. We brought in leadership from the Christian Coalition to talk to some members that were very conservative Christian members about the faith implications as as from their standpoint. And then we really targeted our grassroots to make sure that we were using the insider information we had through our government affairs and lobbying team to maximize the effectiveness of your ability to communicate directly with members. So we really focused on making sure we were talking to members in a way that they wanted to be talked to, be it online or handwritten letters or postcards or phone calls, and really try to maximize our grassroots voices that way. I'm going to go ahead and walk through some images of the campaign because I think that's a great way to share it. So, Lauren, if you would, we're going to quickly go through just a few of these. So, one of the things we knew, if we were going to credibly use conservative messaging, we wanted a conservative sponsor. So pictured here in the center is Senator Dave Wallace, a Republican state senator who is the lead sponsor of our legislation. And Dave came to this from a national security standpoint. He's a former combat helicopter pilot who lived through, the 70s and the oil embargoes and strongly believes that our ability to produce our own natural, local sourced power was important. And then seated next to him, the gentleman with the dark hair and glasses is the Public Service Commission Chairman, Ted Thomas, who testified on behalf of our bill. This is at our first committee hearing. So that got us off to a good start. Lauren, next slide, please. We also, as I said, we try to maximize our grassroots capabilities. So we had a huge lobby day where we had almost 100 member volunteers come to Little Rock. We did training in the morning and went over to the Capitol in the afternoon and talked one-on-one with members, with their members as constituents, which we found to be a tremendously effective tactic, and one that this year, with COVID, that we're going to have to figure out how to replace that kind of face-to-face engagement that we had. It's one of the challenges we're looking at. Go ahead, Lauren, and scroll through. You can see here just how we branded and identified. This photo comes from the day the bill was signed into law. And I don't want to underestimate the achievement. There were folks at the beginning of the campaign that said, if the utilities aren't with you, you're never going to get legislation through the Capitol. You're just not going to do it. Well, we did. And we did it because of a great mix of smart strategy and a motivated and engaged membership of volunteers. Next slide, please. So what ended up happening is the legislature passed the Solar Access Act, 28-2 in the Senate, 83-5 in the House, an overwhelming bipartisan majority in both chambers. And it's working. Since the time when we were talking to members about the Solar Access Act, Arkansas has climbed from 43rd in the country up to 25th in a very short amount of time. That's a very rapid improvement. And we've made an ally in the governor's office. When he signed our bill, the governor doesn't do a bill signing for every piece of legislation that's passed. He made a point to do one with ours. And said, with this bill, Arkansas is now open for solar business. And so having that kind of support has put us in a strong position. However, utilities are used to playing the long game. Next slide, please. So, in the time since then, we always expected that this wasn't the kind of situation. And it's a good lesson where you get to pass a piece of legislation and then, walk away. So we stayed engaged as Audubon through the regulatory implementation of the law. And now in the current session, we're starting to see utilities and electric cooperatives pushing rollbacks to the Solar Access Act. We're very concerned about that. So we expect two major legislative battles this session to protect the progress we've made. with the Solar Access Act. The first being filed, and that's Senate Bill 23. The House version is House Bill 1055. And what it is it's a bill written by the electric cooperatives of Arkansas that would just remove them from oversight by the Public Service Commission altogether. So, the shorthand version is they didn't get the answer they wanted when we implemented the law. So they want to get out and be able to write their own rules. Obviously, we're pushing back on that. We feel like it would have, we know it would have a detrimental on solar. The other unfortunate part is it would dampen economic development in parts of the state that need it the most. Some of the rural parts of the state that are really struggling could really benefit from solar investment. And so it's absolutely the wrong direction. I will say our people power is already having an impact. That bill has been now twice scheduled for committee hearings, and both times the sponsor has pulled it down off the agenda because of the vocal opposition to the bill, and the fact that currently they just don't have the votes to move it out of committee, and they know that. That's the same thing our vote count is telling us, is telling them. But it's not dead. They have, like I said, pulled it down voluntarily without a vote, and continue to try to amend around the edges to try to win more votes with each, concession. Interestingly, they are not working with our coalition of environmental groups and clean energy groups. They've told us that it wasn't about solar, but they're not willing to agree to follow the Public Service Commission's guidance on Arkansas solar law. So we still stand in opposition to that, and will not endorse that legislation unless they carve out solar and say they're going to continue to follow state law on solar. The other potential rollback hasn't been written yet, but Entergy, one of the state's largest investor-owned utility company, has been telling members that they intend to introduce legislation this session that would alter net metering. In fact, they want to replace net metering with a system that they call two-channel billing, which is tremendously detrimental to solar valuation. It's something that they tried to get through the regulatory process and were denied. And so now they're trying, they're saying they intend to seek a legislative change that would mandate that. We will also fight that bill once we have it written, and we'll make sure that this group is ready to help us stand up and say that rolling back the progress that is literally responsible for over $300 million of private capital investment in Arkansas in just 2 years is absolutely the wrong way to go for both our environment and our economy. Next slide, Lauren. That's a quick overview before I pass it back to Thomas to talk about, our spring strategy, the strategy that we're going to pursue this legislative session. Wanted to open it up, see if there were any brief questions. You can type them into the chat, and I will nominate Thomas or Lauren to moderate those. If not, we can also do Q&A. You can also bring up questions during the breakout session. There'll be a lot of back and forth discussion opportunity there.
Great. Thank you, Gary. And not seeing any questions for the moment, I'll continue, and we can definitely discuss in the smaller groups and get into more depth on these questions. And but just to talk a little bit about the strategy for the spring, Lauren, do you want to move to the next slide here? Thanks very much.
Before you do, Thomas, there was one question there that did pop up, and I may have talked too quickly and run over this. There were three main components of the Solar Access Act. It allowed for solar leasing for everyone. There you go. Brent put in the landing page too, where you can find all this. It allowed solar leasing for everyone, meaning you don't have to come up with the capital up front. If you want to install solar at your home, you can lease it from a company. For nonprofits, government entities, it created what they call a third-party purchase agreement option, which will allow us to partner with a private entity that can monetize the federal tax incentives. And I know that's a little in the weeds, but it really helps make it more economical for those entities. And it increased the size, right? Solar, like so many things, is more cost effective at scale. Our old size limits were very small. And so it tripled, basically, a little more than tripled the size limits that folks could install under our net metering rules. Back to you, Thomas.
Great. Thank you for that. So as Gary mentioned, all legislative session, the utilities will be putting pressure on state legislators to roll back some of the rights of homeowners and small businesses in Arkansas to generate their own power and to make money by selling it back to the grid. But if legislators know that there is widespread public support for protecting fair access to solar, as we very clearly saw in 2019, we will be able to maintain that progress and the huge solar increases that have occurred thanks to the passage of the Solar Access Act. And so that's where we come in and why we're launching this campaign. And this spring, if you want to go to the next slide, we will be gathering petitions, building a coalition of small businesses, writing letters to the editor of papers around the state, writing to Governor Hutchinson to thank him for his leadership on this issue in particular, and contacting state legislators to let them know where we stand. We need to build a movement ready to act quickly to prevent rollbacks and repeals this legislative session, which is why it's so important that we're all here today and ready to take action on these issues. Because if we're all prepared for when these rollbacks do arrive, that will make us that much more ready to react in time and to prevent us from losing any of this ground. And so just to talk a little bit about what we think we'll need to do to have the desired impact, we think we'll probably need at least 5,000 petition signatures from around the state so that we can show legislators from all over that this is an issue that their constituents care about. We also want to build a coalition of over 60 small businesses that support protecting solar access, publish letters to the editor in newspapers around the state, as I mentioned, advocating for good solar policy and against rollbacks, and make dozens of calls to elected leaders, social media posts around crucial votes, and as I mentioned, write letters by hand to Governor Hutchinson to thank him for his continued support for keeping Arkansas open for solar business. So now's the time to talk about how we're going to achieve these goals over the next couple of months and prevent any rollbacks this spring, and to talk about how all of you can make an impact in preserving the remarkable gains that citizen advocacy on solar has already achieved in Arkansas. And so we have a chance to, for all of us to start taking action right now through the breakout sessions that we're about to split into. So we'll be in these groups for around 25 minutes or so to talk about how we can build a successful grassroots movement in these next couple of months, given all the limitations that we're facing right now, what all of us can do to get involved. And we'll roll out some ways to get involved in the coming weeks, actions folks can take, and then also brainstorm ideas of groups to reach out to, businesses to partner with, etc. So we'll split off into much smaller groups. We'll split off into groups of maybe 10 or 15 or so to do that. And we'll launch those in just a minute or two. For those not familiar with these breakout sessions on Zoom, you don't have to do anything other than press yes when you get an invitation to join the breakout room. And then we'll return and debrief around 6:50. One thing just to note, to be sure not to do, don't click leave this meeting, because then you'll get entirely kicked out. If it happens, don't worry too much. You can rejoin. We'll get you back to the right place. But just accept the invitation to join the breakout group. And then we'll all reconvene in about 25 minutes. so we can launch those breakout rooms now and address any further questions that come up then. It looks like we're mostly back here. So thank you everyone very much for joining us this evening. In these last couple of minutes, I want to make sure that everyone took the time for the 2 quick actions that we just went through. So first off, sending that text to 10 friends to invite them to sign the petition. I'll copy that again in the chat in case anyone has lost it. But if the number of people who are on the call now, and there might be some more people rejoining, all share it to 10 friends, we could have 600 more people tonight in Arkansas around the state signing the petition that we can use to demonstrate that support to the state legislature. So that's a great action to take now. And then the other quick reminder is to fill out the next step sign up form that we've got here for next actions to take on the campaign. And just to preview those for everyone, we will have weekly volunteer meetings on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. that you can sign up for via that link. And then we'll also be having a campaign action meeting this coming Wednesday at 6 p.m. To focus on writing letters to Governor Hutchinson, shore up his support as a great ally for solar in the state. So I've got those 2 things there. And those will be the 2 quick actions to take before leaving and wrapping up this meeting. Thank you all for joining us. I think the best thing to do now for these final 5 minutes will to give folks some time to do those 2 things. So text 10 friends and fill out the next step sign up form, and then open the floor if anyone has any lingering questions or things they want to raise.
Thomas, this is Gary. Just to close, I pasted a link to an article in the chat for everyone in Talk Business because I think everyone should take a second just to read it if you can. But this is from the Public Service Commission Chairman Ted Thomas addressing the State Joint Energy Committee, and he really lays out the case. And his words were, "We have something good going on." And then he closes it with, "Expect a fight to stop it. This is going to be a contentious issue, but with the Solar Access Act in place, we are prepared for what the EPA is going to do." And what he means there is it puts Arkansas in position to transition to a clean energy economy, right? So I think that's just a great encapsulation of where we are and what we're looking at. And thank you all so much for taking this time of yours tonight when you could be doing anything else and spending it with us and being engaged in this process. It really is the secret sauce that makes this stuff work. So thank you. Thomas, I'll kick it back to you for the last word and to shut us down.
Wonderful. Well, thanks very much, Gary, and thank you all so much for joining us this evening on what's certainly a good day for Policy for Birds with that MBTA news, and that is hopefully the start of a bright couple of weeks for protecting solar access in Arkansas. Thanks so much for joining. I'll stay on for a few minutes if anyone wants to chat.